unemployed woman took the stage of Britain's television show Britain's Got Talent. And her appearance was so unimpressive that the judges dismissed her almost immediately before she began to sing. She was an absolute unknown. She lived in the house that she had grown up with. She'd spent the last 5 or 6 years in seclusion caring for her elderly mother. But when she began to sing I Dream a Dream from Les Miserables, she brought the house down. Everyone wanted to know, who is this Susan Boyle? She became an overnight celebrity. Now, she's handled it well. She's bought a modest home. She still does limited singing engagements, and she still does volunteer work in the Catholic parish of which she's a part, visiting the elderly every week. So her celebrity has not ruined her. It's enhanced her life. But after 5 years had passed, I had to look up her name. I couldn't remember. I knew there was a story, but I didn't remember her name. Because celebrity status can be fleeting, can't it? It can be here one moment and gone the next. Today's Palm Sunday, and it begins in celebration of a celebrity. And it's about crowds and it's about parades. And we as Christians this time of the year find our appropriate place in the crowd. This parade that wasn't planned. People in Jerusalem are going about their business. They're getting ready for the feast of the Passover. The women are making plans for what they'll have for the meals, and the men are talking politics on the street corner. And nothing much is expected to change except that this city, which usually has a population of about 40,000, will swell to 250,000 people within just a few days. And there on the east side, let's see, which side is east? Anybody? East side. There on the east side. The east side of Jerusalem is the Mount of Olives. And on the Mount of Olives, Jesus and his disciples are there. And Jesus does the strangest thing. He sends 2 of his disciples into the village to commandeer, to borrow a donkey, a young donkey, an unbroken colt, and its mother, so that he can ride into Jerusalem, so that he can fulfill the ancient prophecy of Zechariah, which was written some 500 years before. And he tells his disciples, if anyone asks what you're doing, just say the Lord has need of these valuable animals, and that they'll be returned. You see, Jesus in his ministry had been talking about a kingdom. He'd been talking in strange terms about the coming of a kingdom. And his disciples had heard that. And the choice of a donkey to ride into Jerusalem was not some accident. He was fulfilling the role of the great shepherd king, King David, who also rode on a sure-footed donkey. And by riding a donkey into the east entrance of Jerusalem, Jesus was making a very clear statement. He is entering Jerusalem with all the trappings of an earthly king. And the city goes wild. The city just goes wild. He's a celebrity. John's gospel gives us a little bit of hint as to why. In John 12, verses 17 and 18, we read, so the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus forth out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. And it was also because they had heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. And so the word had now traveled, as Reverend Hollis preached last week, this amazing thing of raising Lazarus from the dead, calling him forth from the tomb. The word had now spread, and so all of Jerusalem came out to meet this celebrity. And in the tradition of the Hebrew people, when a conquering victor returns, a king returns, the cloaks, the coats of the people are laid out on the road before the animal that bears the conquering victor. And palm branches begin to wave like pom-poms on a Friday night in Texas at a football game. They're waving those pom-poms, and the crowd is on fire. The chants begin to swell from Psalm 118, the traditional victory psalm of the Hebrew people. Hosanna, save us, redeem us. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And when he had entered Jerusalem proper, Matthew's gospel tells us in verse 10 that the city was either in turmoil or moved or shaken. The root word there comes from the same word from which we get earthquake. The city was rocking. Jesus had literally rocked all of Jerusalem. It was in a turmoil. And people are running to the action. They're leaning on tiptoe. They're standing up and saying, "Who is this? Who is the center of all of this? Who is this Jesus?" And they say, "He's a prophet from Nazareth." And that sounds almost comical and absurd. Because remember, nothing good much came out of Nazareth. He's a celebrity. And the disciples that are with him are thinking, "Oh, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. He's finally going to reveal who he is. Now we're going to be vindicated. This is going to be wonderful. Everyone will know what we know." And maybe in the darker and deeper recesses of their mind, they were saying, "My star is going to rise with him. I'm going to be a celebrity too." But celebrity has its limitations, doesn't it? I imagine if I were to write George Clooney a letter and ask to borrow $10,000, I wouldn't get a reply. Because celebrity status doesn't require all that much. We like to talk about our celebrities. We like to talk about their behavior. It gives us something to talk about. But celebrities don't engage with us very much. They don't ask much of us. They want us to buy tickets to their concerts. They want us to purchase the products that they endorse. But we can go on about our daily lives pretty much the same, absent our celebrities. But what's happening here is something different. This is about kingship. This is about kingship. Because on this very day, two other kings are entering Jerusalem at the same time for the Passover while Jesus is entering from the east. On the north, King Herod Antipas is entering. He is entering with a show of military might because he wants to keep order in this city that's population is swelling. He knows how tricky it can be. He knows that a single thing can set it off. And from the west comes Pilate, marching with 1,000 Roman soldiers and fine stallions and waving banners coming into the city. It's a convergence of kings in Jerusalem, but they're not all the same. In fact, one king is very, very different. Because this king is none other than the King of love. Your king, my king. The reason we're gathered in this room. A king who calls to you and me but never compels you and me to follow him. A king whose love is of such a great degree that it cannot be ignored. A king who merits from us a response. Who merits from me and you not just our blind loyalty, but our willing allegiance, our love. Great love demands a great response. And to take this story in total, you've got to read all four Gospels and look at them a little bit, because there's one little hint in Luke's Gospel, the 9th chapter, the 41st verse, that says something that the other Gospels don't record, but I think it's an important little tidbit, because Luke's Gospel tells us when he drew near the city of Jerusalem, he wept over it. He wept. Jesus stops halfway down the Mount of Olives, and as I read the Gospels, Jesus is only recorded to weep twice in the Gospels. Once when he learns that Lazarus has died, and once when he pauses, coming down the Mount of Olives, to look out over Jerusalem. Celebrities don't usually weep for their fans, but this is a king. This is a king who loves beyond measure, who's willing to suffer for you and me, a king who commands those who follow him not only to love their enemies, but to wear their enemies down with the same willingness to suffer that he'll soon demonstrate. And so a shift is occurring now. A twist. We've come into Jerusalem in celebration. But now we're getting ready to move from the Lenten season into Holy Week, and those who follow this King of love, something's expected of us. Something's required of us. And it messes with our minds and our hearts and our wills. Because all the notions that I have in my conscious mind and deeply ingrained of me of what a king is and what a king does have to do with things like being decisive and powerful and effective, being a bit of a celebrity. And I think the people in the crowd that were there that day that were shouting, save us, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. That was their conception of a king as well. And when that didn't happen immediately, their accolades gave way to indifference and even the disapproval and disdain of the crowd. But this king always functioned with an authority which defied the expectations of everyone. It's okay. Fame, celebrity, they're fleeting. The crowd will not understand. On Monday, he'll cleanse the temple, because he cannot abide the poor getting ripped off by the religious establishment, selling sacrifices at 10 and 100 times their value. On Tuesday, he'll go to the religious leaders and he'll call them to their faces whitewashed tombs, because they set standards for the people that they themselves cannot adhere to. And on Wednesday, as Caiaphas and the high priest are plotting his death, he'll dine at the home of a leper named Simon, and a woman of questionable character will anoint him in the same manner in which kings are anointed. And even his own disciples will become indignant and at the impropriety of it all. They can't understand. He's being anointed as a king. And on Thursday, at the Passover meal, this king will do something that no king in his right mind would consider doing. He'll engage in the work usually reserved for slaves. He'll bend over and he'll wash the feet of his disciples. And then for this king, everything begins to point to Friday, to Calvary, and to the cross. But so what? What does it mean for you and me today, right now? I think it has something to do with this, that great love demands a great response. Jesus knew, Jesus knows of the Father's great love for you and for me. And Jesus lived in this world in such a consciousness of the Father's love that a response was required of him. He would go to Gethsemane and say, "Not my will, but thine be done." A great preacher has said that in the greatest act of love that has ever taken place, Jesus gives his own person for us and to us. And so now we're transitioning. And the coming week will tell us such a great story of cosmic love that a response will be required of us. This humble, burden-bearing King of love who came not as a celebrity but as a suffering servant bids you and me to join him as his subjects, to learn his identity not as a celebrity. And that's too often what I do. I think of Jesus as a celebrity. And Jesus would have me know him as King. And if I am to accept him as King, he bids me to give myself to him as he has given himself to me. And to give myself over to that perfect love which casts out fear. And in so doing, I will be saved. Behold, the King comes, riding on a donkey from the east into Jerusalem. Behold, he comes as a celebrity. And soon, in the praetorium, the court of the governor, when Pilate says, "I find no fault in him. Do with him what you will," the soldiers will come for him. And they'll take a purple robe. And they'll strip him of his clothes. And they'll wrap him in this purple robe to demonstrate royalty. And then they'll take a crown of thorns. And they'll place it upon his head. And with a cane that imitates a royal scepter, they'll begin to beat him about the head, all the same time saluting him, shouting, "Hail, King of the Jews," spitting upon him and mocking him. Great love calls forth from you and me a great response. There is no greater love than this, that a man would lay down his life for another. There will be no celebrity status for Jesus. He will be King of your life and of mine. And he will rule and lord over us in love. Let us prepare ourselves to give to him all the glory and all the honor that is his due. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit. Amen.